When your career is going fine, the worst thing that can happen is a promotion you didn't ask for. This is the story of how I accepted it, regretted it, and ended up exactly where I needed to be. I used to think I had the best setup a guy like me could ask for, 26, working in HR at a big enough company to matter but small enough that people still said good morning when they passed you in the hallway, decent salary, decent benefits, and a schedule that felt like someone had accidentally approved a dream, 4 days a week in the office but only for about 4 or 5 hours each day, the rest remote, and Fridays fully from home, which meant I could actually have a life, go to the gym in the morning, hit up a night class twice a week, freelance a little on the side when I felt like it, nothing major, just a couple of projects here and there to keep things interesting, and I wasn't trying to climb any ladders or build a kingdom. I just wanted balance, and somehow I had it. And then, on a random Monday that started like any other, I got called into this weirdly quiet meeting room by 2 people from upper management I barely knew, and before I could even sit down properly they dropped it. Brenda, the longtime HR director, was gone, just like that, no details, and they wanted me to step in as acting head of HR, effective immediately. And I actually looked around like I was on a hidden camera show because that didn't make any sense. I wasn't the senior-most person, I wasn't the loudest or the most assertive or whatever it is people think leadership looks like. I was just solid, dependable, the guy who got things done without making a big deal about it. And maybe that's exactly why they picked me, because I wouldn't ask questions, I just say yes, and for some reason I did say yes, maybe out of shock, maybe because I didn't want to look ungrateful, maybe because I thought this could be a good thing. Like I was leveling up or something, and for the first few hours I let myself believe that maybe I'd finally have influence, maybe I'd get to fix things that always bugged me from the sidelines, maybe this was the beginning of a new chapter. But within 3 days, I was drowning, like fully underwater, because suddenly I was dealing with actual management problems, like real ones, people crying in my office over team disputes, complaints that had been ignored for months, passive-aggressive email chains that spiraled into actual shouting matches in shared spaces, and on top of all that I still had to keep my original work going. And then came the meetings, and more meetings, and meetings about scheduling meetings. And I hadn't had a full lunch break in a week when I decided to check my paycheck just to see if this hell at least came with hazard pay, and yeah, it was more, but only $200 more, and that's before taxes, and it hit me all at once. I traded freedom for stress, quiet hours for constant noise, and none of it felt worth it, but I didn't know how to back out without looking like a failure, so I told myself to push through, to give it a month, to prove I could handle it, even as everything in me was already whispering that I was in over my head. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just an adjustment period, that I'd get used to the longer hours and constant people problems and slowly settle into the role, but the truth is, things only got worse. Every time I thought I'd cleared one fire, another one would spark up, and soon it became obvious that the entire department had been held together by duct tape and Brenda's sheer willpower, because now that she was gone, everyone was looking at me for answers I didn't have, and the stuff that used to be someone else's headache, office politics, staff drama, cross-department tension, all of it landed squarely in my lap, and it wasn't just exhausting, it was demoralizing, because no matter what I tried, nothing actually fixed the root problems, just temporarily quieted them until they exploded again a few days later. And on top of it, I was now involved in hiring, which sounded straightforward until I realized that most of the people coming in for interviews had no idea what they were doing. 23-year-olds with no experience asking for director-level salaries and refusing to do in-office days because they don't vibe with desks, and after the 6th person that week asked if we had an app pod, I started to genuinely wonder if I was being pranked. But no, this was just hiring in 2023, and then the deadline came for filling a crucial vacancy in the operations support team, a role that had been vacant for a month before I even stepped in, and I hadn't found anyone suitable, and I knew it, and they knew it. And then came the email summoning me upstairs for a check-in, which turned into a not-so-gentle reprimand from one of the VPs about the importance of ownership and leadership accountability. And I sat there trying to keep my face neutral while my chest burned, because I was doing everything I could with what I had, and no one had even asked if I wanted this job. And later that week, out of pure frustration, I asked around for Brenda's number, and finally a former colleague sent it to me with a simple, "You should hear it from her." So I texted her, not expecting much, but she replied almost instantly and offered to meet for coffee, and we did, and she looked so relaxed it made me jealous. And after a few minutes of small talk, I just said it, "Why did you really leave?" And she looked at me for a second and then said, "They pushed me out," and explained how she'd asked for a raise to help cover her daughter's college tuition, that she made her case professionally and respectfully backed it up with stats. And still they told her she was replaceable, that budgets were tight, and then she was gone, and now she was in a new role at another company where she made more, had a team that actually supported her, and got home in time to cook dinner, and I just sat there listening, stunned, realizing that everything I was fighting to hold together had already been declared unimportant by the people who ran it. After meeting with Brenda, something shifted in me, not all at once, but like a quiet cracking sound under the surface, and I started showing up to work with this weird awareness that I was basically a placeholder in a system that didn't care if I broke down. As long as I kept smiling through it, and yeah, I still tried, still answered emails at midnight, still sat through meetings where no one agreed on anything, still smiled at coworkers who only came to me when something went wrong, but the spark was gone, and worse, I started to feel like I was faking it, like I was just playing dress up as someone who had it all together, and then it all came to a head when two departments, IT and sales, got into a full-blown standoff over a software migration, and I was pulled right into the middle of it because apparently HR was expected to mediate cross-functional conflict now, and I did my best to talk everyone down, tried to find common ground. But it felt like arguing with toddlers holding flamethrowers, and I just wasn't built for that level of corporate diplomacy, especially not without a support system or a clue what upper management actually wanted from me, and of course the whole mess escalated until it landed on the CEO's desk. And the next morning I got a calendar invite with his name on it and the subject line, Quick Sync, which everyone knows is never actually quick or a sync, and when I walked into his office he didn't yell or throw blame, he just looked at me with this annoying calm and said, "Ryan, we like you, but this role is clearly a stretch," and I think I already knew what was coming, but hearing him say it still stung. He told me they were going to restructure my position, that I'd return to my old job, full-time. In office, 5 days a week, no bonuses or work-from-home privileges for at least 3 months while I rebuild trust, and for a second I almost nodded and accepted it like a good employee, but something in me snapped quietly but decisively, and I just said, "I don't think this works for me anymore," and placed my badge on his desk, and the CEO raised an eyebrow like he hadn't expected pushback, and I stood up, calm but done, and walked to the door, and just as I reached it he said, "You're good at inputting data, Ryan, but this isn't Excel," and I turned around and said, "And you're good at talking like a leader without actually being one," then walked out, heart pounding but free. The weirdest part about quitting like that wasn't the adrenaline or the shock or even the awkward silence as I packed my stuff into a sad little cardboard box, it was how quickly the calm set in afterward. Like my body had been waiting for me to finally listen, and now that I had, it could exhale for the first time in months, and I didn't have a plan, not really. Just a savings buffer and some old freelance clients I could maybe reach out to if I needed to float myself for a while, but I didn't even make it 3 full days before I got a call from a number I didn't recognize, and when I picked up, it was Brenda, laughing a little as she said, "So I heard you made an exit," and I couldn't help but laugh too, like yeah, I really did, and she said, "You've got fans, by the way, some of the folks still there told me what happened, and I think you handled it better than most," and then she got to the point. She was hiring, needed a second-in-command at her new place, and asked if I wanted to come interview, and I almost said yes on the spot, but instead I played it cool and said I'd love to talk more, and we met 2 days later at this quiet little cafe across town where I didn't have to wear a badge or pretend to care about synergy. And she laid it out straight, the job wasn't easy, but the team was real, the leadership actually listened, and the pay? Way better than what I was getting paid to slowly lose my sanity before, and I signed the offer the next morning, no hesitation, and just like that, I was back in HR, only this time, not as some temporary stand-in or disposable cog, but as someone whose perspective was actually valued, and it was strange how quickly I slipped into the rhythm there, like my brain hadn't forgotten how to enjoy work, just needed the right environment to do it in. And after a few weeks I caught myself smiling during meetings, not the fake tight-lipped kind but actual smiles, because even when things got complicated or stressful, I didn't feel alone in it, and that made all the difference. The months started flying by in a way they never had before, not because things were easier, but because they actually made sense now, like there was structure without suffocation, purpose without politics, and Brenda kept her word. She treated me like a true second-in-command, not a glorified assistant, looped me into strategy calls, asked for my input, and actually listened, and being in a place where your voice isn't just tolerated but trusted, that does something to you. It gives you confidence, but not the fake kind you use to survive boardrooms, the real kind that builds up slowly until you catch yourself leading without overthinking every word, and somewhere around the 6-month mark, she pulled me aside after a long Tuesday and said, "Just so you know, I'll probably be stepping up into a VP role by this time next year, and when I do, I want you ready," and I just blinked at her, not because I didn't want it but because for the First time in my career someone was saying, I believe you can handle this without a catch, without overloading me or setting me up to fail, and from that point on she started gradually handing me more weight, handling budget revisions, mentoring junior staff, even leading a small training session. And yeah, I fumbled some of it, but instead of getting scolded or ignored, I got actual feedback, support, a nudge in the right direction, and I started to realize that leadership isn't about being perfect, it's about being honest, consistent, and human, and every week I grew into it more, until one day I caught a glance of myself in the elevator mirror and thought, I kind of look like someone who knows what they're doing, which sounds dumb, I know, but for someone who used to feel like a background extra in his own career, it meant everything. There was this moment, I remember it perfectly, where I was sitting in a conference room with a couple of new hires, walking them through onboarding stuff, nothing fancy, just the basics, and one of them looked at me midway through and said, "You make this all seem less scary," and I laughed, not because it was funny but because I knew exactly what he meant, because I remembered being the person sitting in that same chair years ago, pretending to take notes while wondering how long it would take for the job to break me, and now here I was on the other side, still flawed, still figuring things out, but somehow in a place where I could make things better for someone else, even in small ways, and I think that's when it really hit me. I didn't need a fancy title or some grand office to feel like I mattered. What I needed was space to grow, people who gave a damn, and the self-awareness to know when something was killing me softly, even if it looked good on paper. And as the weeks rolled on, I got better, not perfect, but sharper, calmer under pressure, more patient when things got messy, and I could feel the team noticing too, not in some big praise-filled way, but in how they came to me sooner when stuff got weird. How they trusted I'd hear them out before making a call, and I started thinking a lot about how much of life gets shaped not by massive events but by the quiet decisions you make when no one's watching. And one night, long after everyone had gone home, I sat at my desk, looking out the window, and I thought about that company I left, that CEO who told me I was only good for inputting numbers, and I realized I didn't even feel angry anymore, just grateful, weirdly, because without that push, I might still be there. Still stuck, still thinking that staying small was safer than trying to grow, and I guess that's the part no one tells you. Sometimes the worst moments are just disguised shortcuts to who you're supposed to become. A few weeks later, Brenda called me into her office, not for anything dramatic, just one of our usual check-ins, but this time she closed the door, sat down across from me, and said, "You've probably noticed, but I've been easing you into more leadership responsibilities." And I nodded because yeah, it had been clear, and then she added, "Well, it's official now, the VP offer came through and I accepted." And for a second I didn't know whether to congratulate her or panic because I knew what that meant, and then she said, "They're opening the head of HR role in 3 months, and I want you ready to apply, like really ready." And I just kind of sat there, processing it all, and she smiled and said, "You don't need to be perfect, you just need to be you. The version of you've been growing into this whole year." And something in me settled when she said that, like all the doubts had been preparing to argue and suddenly had no case. And after that conversation I threw myself into the next phase, not with pressure, but with purpose. I started mentoring new hires more directly, shadowing her during tough conversations, digging deeper into the parts of the job I used to avoid, and every day I learned a little more. Not just about HR, but about people, about how fragile and fierce and frustrating and brilliant teams can be when they're led with clarity and care. And there were still bad days, miscommunications, long nights, dumb system errors that made me want to throw my laptop out the window, but now they didn't define me, they were just part of it, like static on a good song. And I started to really feel that I could do this, not just temporarily, not just as a fill-in, but for real. And sometimes that feeling would sneak up on me when I least expected it, like in the elevator with someone thanking me for listening, or catching my own reflection mid-laugh in a hallway conversation and thinking, damn, this actually fits. 1 year to the week after I left my old job with nothing but a cardboard box and a dry goodbye, I walked into a meeting room at my new company and took my seat at the end of a long, sunlit table, not as someone filling in, not as someone tagging along, but as someone being introduced as the incoming head of HR. And I looked around at the faces in the room, some familiar, some new, and felt a quiet kind of pride, not loud, not movie montage glory, just that deep internal click that tells you you're exactly where you're supposed to be. And after the meeting, Brenda pulled me aside and said, "Told you you'd grow into it." And I laughed because yeah, she did, and yeah, I had. And in the months that followed, I built my own rhythm, my own way of leading, not perfect, but steady, honest, human. And I kept thinking about how everything that felt like failure before was actually just foundation, and how if I had stayed comfortable, I never would have found any of this. And it still blows my Mind how much of life comes down to people, not titles, not systems, not 5-year plans, but people, the ones who believe in you when you forget how to believe in yourself, the ones who step on you to climb. The ones who open doors quietly and let you walk through without fanfare. And I guess if there's one thing I know now that I didn't know then, it's this: the right people won't just hand you opportunities, they'll prepare you for them, walk beside you, help you fail safely until you learn to rise. And if the wrong people try to break you before you're ready, that's not the end, it's just proof that your values scared them, and sometimes that's all the clarity you need to keep going and keep growing. And keep choosing your future even when the past tries to drag you back down. Subscribe, hit the like button, and explore more fascinating stories.